A doctor presses two fingers against a trembling wrist, and the number staring back controls the room the same way panic controls you right before you freeze. The pulse reads 120 beats a minute, racing inside a sweltering Miami gymnasium. Reporters lean in close, scribbling the word insane into their notebooks. By the end of this story, you will see that what looked like a mind breaking apart was actually the most disciplined performance in sports history, built in a single day. Because if you cannot tell the difference between real panic and controlled panic, you will spend your whole life avoiding the exact moments that could make you unforgettable. That is the cost of not knowing this. February the 25th, 1964. The clock has already started. That same losing of control is now visible on a scale in Miami. 22-year-old Cassius Clay stands in front of Sonny Liston, a heavyweight champion backed by men who make problems disappear, screaming and lunging as handlers strain to hold him back. His eyes are wide. His voice cracks on every syllable. Two doctors murmur to officials that this fighter may be too disturbed to enter the ring at all. This is the exact reaction the entire performance was built to provoke. 9 hours earlier, in a quiet hotel room, Clay sits on the edge of a bed, his hands shaking so hard he cannot lace his own shoes. This is not the showman. This is a 22-year-old who genuinely believes he might die tonight. Liston has already destroyed two men inside a single round each. Clay's own trainer has quietly told friends he fears his fighter will be seriously hurt. The fear in that hotel room is real, physical, and completely unrehearsed. Here is the disease almost everyone carries and never names. Call it the panic puppet. It is the moment your nerves take the controls, your voice shakes, your hands stop working, and you let that shaking convince you to shrink instead of show up. The panic puppet does not just live in boxing rings. It lives in the pause before you raise your hand in a meeting, the silence before a hard conversation, the message you leave unsent because your pulse spiked and you mistook that spike for a verdict. Clay's team faces the panic puppet directly that morning. His fear is not shrinking. If anything, it is getting worse as the weigh-in approaches. Something has to be done with all of that raw voltage before it does something to him instead. His trainer and cornermen gather around him with one blunt question. What do you do with fear you cannot switch off? Clay does not attempt to calm his hands. He asks a stranger question instead. What if the shaking became the show? This decision becomes the mechanism the rest of this story is built on. Call it the fear flip. Instead of hiding the tremor, exaggerate it. Instead of suppressing the racing heart, let it drive the volume up until fear reads as fury. The fear flip works because it does not ask you to feel less. Most advice about nerves tells you to breathe, to calm down, to relax before something enormous. Clay's team understood that command rarely works when the stakes are life-sized. So the modern version of the fear flip looks like this. Before a job interview, instead of trying to flatten your racing pulse, you let that same energy sharpen your eyes, quicken your words, and turn nervous tension into visible intensity. A trembling hand before a presentation is not proof you are unprepared. It is raw fuel with nowhere to go yet. The fear flip simply gives that fuel a direction, aiming it outward as performance instead of inward as paralysis. Clay begins rehearsing something nobody has attempted at this level before. Controlled chaos. He paces the hotel hallway shouting predictions at anyone who will listen, testing how loud, how wild, how theatrical his fear can sound before it becomes a weapon. By mid-morning, the calculation sharpens further. Liston is a fighter who reads other fighters like a butcher reads meat, sizing up hesitation, searching for the flinch that tells him exactly where to strike first. If Clay walks in visibly afraid in the ordinary way, Liston will see prey. But if Clay walks in screaming, unpredictable, seemingly unstable, Liston has never trained for that. There is no manual for fighting a man who appears to have lost his mind. This is the specific arithmetic behind the fear flip. Real fear reads as weakness to a predator. Performed madness reads as an unknown variable, and predators hesitate in front of unknown variables far longer than they hesitate in front of fear. Right here is exactly where most people think they already have the whole lesson and drift away. But the mechanism still has its most dangerous layer left to reveal. Subscribing now means you get that layer, and every other hidden mechanism this channel uncovers the moment it drops. Clay tests the volume of his own madness on his inner circle first, screaming lines about drowning Liston, about putting him in a coffin, about writing poetry over his corpse, watching their faces for the exact moment it becomes believable. One assistant later admits he did not know whether to laugh or call a doctor. That confusion is the entire point. If people close to Clay cannot tell performance from breakdown, strangers certainly will not be able to either. By early afternoon, Clay has stopped trying to control the shaking in his hands altogether. He lets it show. He lets his voice crack. He simply decides what that shaking will be used for, instead of fighting to make it disappear. If you're still measuring your own worth by whether your voice stays steady under pressure, this is the moment to notice something. Steadiness was never actually the requirement. Direction was. Where your energy goes matters more than whether it exists at all. Clay's camp arrives at the weigh-in venue early to study the room, the officials, the exact placement of Liston's dressing area, treating the performance itself like a fight that starts before either man throws a punch. Word spreads through the arena that Clay might not show at all, that fear has finally caught up with the loud young challenger. Everyone dismissed as a comedian, with a big mouth and small chances against a real killer. This is precisely the story Clay wants circulating. Let Liston hear that his opponent is unraveling. Let the champion walk in expecting a broken boy. Expectation is a door, and Clay is about to walk through it as something else entirely. If you have made it this far, you already understand something most people never will about pressure and performance. And there is one more piece of this method still to come. A reveal that changes everything you think you know about that day. The official weigh-in begins. Clay enters wearing a denim jacket with the words "Bear Huntin'" stitched across the back, a direct taunt aimed at Liston, who is known in the press as the Bear. Clay begins screaming the moment he sees Liston, calling him ugly, calling him a chump, jabbing his finger toward the champion's face, while handlers physically restrain him from lunging across the room. His voice climbs into a register nobody has heard from him before. Cracking, shrieking, repeating the phrase "I am ready to rumble" until it stops sounding like a slogan and starts sounding like a man coming apart at the seams. Doctors move in and check his pulse mid-tantrum. 120 beats a minute, a number typically associated with a man already inside a fight, not one still fully clothed and standing on a scale. Reporters in the room begin writing the story that will run in every paper by morning. Cassius Clay has finally cracked under pressure. Officials in the back room quietly discuss whether the fight should even proceed as scheduled. This is the turn nobody sees coming. It is not simply that Clay performed fear well, it is that his performance worked so completely, it nearly destroyed the very fight it was designed to win. Boxing commission officials huddle privately, weighing whether a fighter this visibly disturbed can be licensed to compete at all that night. A commissioner is overheard saying the kid looks like he needs a hospital, not a ring. Call this the cancellation threat. The exact performance built to unsettle Liston has become convincing enough to unsettle the very authorities whose permission Clay needs to fight in the first place. There was never a version of this plan that included a backup. If officials pull the license tonight, there is no rematch, no rescheduled date, no second chance at the fight Clay has spent years positioning himself to win. This is the part every retelling of the loud, confident Clay conveniently skips. The performance was not simply bold. It was one honest miscalculation, away from ending his career before it fully began. The cancellation threat exists in your life too. Quieter, but just as real. The modern version shows up when a bold move, a public stand, a big swing reads as too much to the exact people whose approval you still need. A founder pitching too aggressively can spook the investor they need. A candidate performing too much confidence can read as arrogance to the interviewer deciding their fate. Boldness without calibration risks the very outcome it was meant to secure. Backstage, Clay's team scrambles. His trainer pulls him aside during a brief pause and delivers one blunt instruction. Pull it back just enough to convince them you are wild, not broken. The difference between those two words is the entire fight. Clay adjusts in real time, letting brief flashes of clarity show through the chaos. Moments where his eyes sharpen and his voice steadies just long enough to reassure officials before the screaming resume is on cue. This adjustment becomes the final piece of the mechanism. Call it the clarity window. Not constant control and not constant chaos, but a handful of precisely timed seconds of total composure hidden inside the performance. The clarity window shows up in your world too. Inside a tense negotiation, a live presentation, a hard conversation with a partner. The handful of seconds where whoever is watching decides if you're credible or unraveling. The clarity window is the difference between reckless and calculated. Anyone can be loud, anyone can be afraid. Very few people can locate the 2 or 3 seconds where absolute clarity needs to surface, and then actually produce it on demand. Officials, uncertain but unwilling to be the ones who canceled the most talked about fight of the year, allow the bout to proceed. The gamble holds, not because the fear disappeared, but because it was aimed with precision at the exact right moment. That night, Clay enters the ring against a fighter most experts predict will knock him out inside 3 rounds. The crowd expects to watch a loud young man get physically punished for months of noise. By the 6th round listing, exhausted and increasingly bewildered by a fighter who will not stand still long enough to be hit, refuses to leave his corner for round 7. The performance from the day before has already won half the fight before a single decisive punch. Clay is declared champion of the world at 22 years old, and the story papers print the next morning still calls it the upset of the century, still missing the fact that almost none of it was left to chance. Here is the mirror moment, the point where this stops being a story about a boxer and starts being a story about you. Because these next questions are not rhetorical, and you have to answer every one of them honestly. When your hand starts shaking before something that matters, do you spend that energy trying to disappear, controlled entirely by the panic puppet? Or do you aim it somewhere on purpose, the way the fear flip demands? Think of the last time you calculated a bold move, and ask honestly whether you checked for a cancellation threat first, or whether you simply hoped the room would read your intensity the way you intended it. And in your highest pressure moments, can you actually locate your own clarity window? The few precise seconds where you drop the noise and become completely composed? Or has that window never once been tested? Most people go their entire lives believing fear and confidence are opposites, that you must defeat one to access the other. Clay's 24 hours prove something far more useful. They're the same raw material, aimed differently. The next time your pulse spikes before something enormous, do not waste energy asking it to slow down. Ask instead what that energy is for, because the panic puppet only wins while you keep treating the shaking as the enemy instead of the fuel. Here is the framework worth keeping. First, name the fear out loud instead of hiding it, because hidden fear festers and aimed fear performs. Second, find your clarity window before you need it, rehearsing the exact seconds you will show total composure under pressure. Third, calculate your cancellation threat honestly before any bold move, asking who actually holds the power to end this and what version of boldness they can tolerate. Skip that question, and even a brilliant performance can collapse the moment before it pays off. Before the final lesson locks in, a final check is waiting on your screen right now. A question about how Ali truly handled the fear that could have ended everything. Look closely, choose your answer, and lock it in, because your response says more about your own fear flip than you think. Cassius Clay walked into that weigh-in as a frightened young man and walked out as Muhammad Ali, not because the fear vanished, but because he refused to let it choose the story on its own. The next 24 hours in your own life will ask you the exact question that morning asked him. Will your nerves run you? Or will you finally aim them somewhere on purpose? Subscribe if you're done being controlled by the panic puppet and ready to build your own fear flip, because the next figure in this series faced the same test and paid an even steeper price for the answer. Fear performed on purpose is not a costume. It is a weapon. That is the entire secret of the 24 hours that made Ali. And it still works exactly the same way today.